Preacher Girl, so we're finally back. I know it's been a few weeks since we've had an awesome podcast or any podcast, but I made sure that when we start again, it is amazing. I have one of your favorites and one of my friends right here. It's Lee Krinitz-Rivera.
That was good. That was good. You got it right.
Right, and my girl always comes looking like a 10. She doesn't have to look like a 10. She is all the way a 10 inside and out. And she has a hat on because it's fall.
And my roots need a little fixing.
So I thought I would wear one of my hats because she wore one of her hats, and this is like the only hat I have. So here we go. This is my hat. This is her hat.
And look how cute you make that look.
Oh,
I mean,
gosh.
for real.
Don't even talk to me about cute. Look at me.
She's got the green on too. Like it's just
my church logo right there.
I love
This
it.
this is my hard hat, even though I have a hard head, and it has my name on it. Look, see, that's my prophetic hat because, as you guys know, we're getting ready to build the Hope NYC Sanctuary. But I'm so blessed and so honored that Lee is here. I'm introducing her, but I'm gonna shut up for most of this because you want to hear her story. If you were a part of the online summit, 10,000 of you were, but if you were a part of it, then you heard her story. And so many of you wanted to know the rest of it, and you were asking questions. Well, that's why she's here today. And I was telling her that she's the only person I know with this particular story. And I know your mind is gonna be blown. I know that you're gonna be as intrigued and shocked and amazed and impressed as I've been with her since the first day I met her. So Lee, thank you for driving all the way to be with us here today.
Of course.
And so she's a talker, and so am I. So I wanna make sure and she talks. So I'm gonna start with at the beginning. Hers is a human trafficking story of a different nature. See, sometimes we think that it's the 5-year-old who looks like she's drugged up that's human trafficked, or the 12-year-old. But there are all kinds of people that are being trafficked or being taken against their will or enslaved in some way, and we don't know it. So I'm gonna let Lee address that a little bit, and then we'll talk some more about it.
So first I want to say thank you.
Are you kidding?
Because it is a joy and the most wonderful opportunity to not just share with you as a friend, because there's something special about building sisterhood in a judgment-free space, right? Because just because we're Christians, just because, we are the body of Christ, you don't always have that. So that's just something very special that I want to note to all the preacher girls, is that this is a woman after God's own heart and mine. And the way that she has opened the door and let me in to share with you, with her audience, is really an honor. So thank you.
My pleasure.
So thank you for that. So yeah, I don't know, where do I begin? I mean, there's so much. You said it. There's a uniqueness about my story, but I don't think it's because it's not happening to people. I think it's because a lot of people who've been in my shoes are not talking about it.
Or do you think they don't know?
Yes, I think the community that I'm involved with is a community of adoptees who know what's happened to them. I don't know necessarily if they're in the church. I have not identified that community within the church per se. There was a time where I was running a foster care ministry, and so we were trying to gather the people in that community. But there, I think, is a lot of shame attached to it. There's a lot of stigma. And I think also there's a lot to do with the adopted families. When we're talking about adoption, there are facets of that. And, from the outside looking in, it's romanticized. We talk about it like, it's like, right, the hero swoops in and takes the child. But there's a really dark side to it, a dark side that a lot of adoptees don't talk about because they feel like they will sound like they are ungrateful.
Wow,
right?
I can see that. So your story is so unique. I want you to go back all the way to the beginning and tell us what happened.
Okay, so I was born in Bogota, Colombia, and when I was 3 months of age, I was sold into this country. And I was given to a mentally ill mother who at the time was not diagnosed, right? So it was illegal. And let me pause there, because that's like a big bite out of the story that a lot of people don't understand. So it wasn't like somebody, now I don't know, there are parts of the story that I don't know. So I don't know if I was kidnapped. I am working with an organization in Amsterdam that is helping me to sort of fit the pieces together as to what happened to me the first 3 months I was alive. What I do know is that I was in an orphanage I don't know where I was when I was first born. I don't know if I was in a hospital. I don't know if I was in a car. I don't know where I was, but I just know that the papers, I did get a copy of my Colombian adoption file, and in those papers were there were some names of there was the name of my biological mother, and there was a signature, but it wasn't hers on the paperwork that gave me away. It was the owner of the orphanage. So again, there's a lot to that little piece of information that could really solidify information for me that I am not aware of at the moment, but we are working towards that. But anyway, so when I was 3 months old, a woman brought me on a plane. Now, in most legal international adoptions, all the paperwork would be filed. There would be visits, right, prerequisites to receiving the child in that country. The parents would normally go to that country,
Right.
take the child, bring them overseas, and by that point they would have a green card. They would have something saying that they had citizenship once they reached the
US
American
soil.
soil,
Yes.
right? So when I got here, it was sort of the opposite. So a woman flew me. I don't know who the woman was. I don't know who she was, but she was a transport. She was a transport. I don't know where she came from, but the woman, as it was told to me, brought me here. Handed me off to my adopted parents at the airport, but they went through a process, but it's called adoption fraud, right? So this is a facet of human trafficking that I spoke about on the summit that falls under human trafficking, right? So if we use the term human trafficking, and that means the illegal sale of a human. Now we know that there are fees that are attached to adoption. However, the fees that were set aside for my life, right? The price tag that was put on my life wasn't just for,
Legal things.
right. It wasn't just for the legalities. It wasn't just for the attorney. It wasn't just for, so you had people in legal places, notaries, judges, people who would sign off on things. And you're talking about the late 70s. You're talking about when Escobar was, in command in Colombia. He was pretty much running the government. And so there was a payout to all the people that put their signature, right? Like on the paperwork. And so what happened was when I got here, there wasn't a background check done on my parents. There were facets of the adoption that were fraudulent, right? And they upped the price because I was part of what's called a transracial adoption, which means that I am from another country and I get paired with a family that was not Hispanic. So my adopted family, they were of Russian and Austrian descent, and they were Jewish, right? So now you have this component to it. So I get here and they take me home, and let me sort of side note, and this is the dark side of these sorts of things, right? When I did look at my paperwork to see how much I was actually sold for, because I actually saw the number on the piece of paper, what I saw was a lot of descriptions about the way I looked. So when I was a baby, I had red hair, I had bluish eyes, and I was very, very fair skinned. And I was explained in the paperwork almost the way that you would explain like what your car that you wanted to get would look like. Oh, it's very lovely. And the words that they were using to describe just they were appropriate, but they felt demeaning, right?
Yes.
Because here you are trying to sell, again, transracial adoption. I was from a Latin American country given over to a white family. And so they really had to make it sound like I would be a good physical pairing to the family. And so that was what bumped up the price. And I know I know these facts only because of this agency that I have been working with in Amsterdam that has done all the work with this generation of young people like me, who were part of that experience, that same experience.
So your experience wasn't just you. It was a lot of kids in Colombia at the time.
Yes.
Well, so was it like a trafficking ring or a program that the Colombian government had set? How did that? How do you know that it was more than you? So
my understanding, and you can get more information about this at Plan Angel. If you just do www.planangel, I think it's .org, you can find out more information. And there were some New York Times articles done on, the group of Colombian children that this was happening to. So basically what was happening was that children were being stolen, children were being given up. There was a variation of different reasons. They were going into orphanages or not, depending on the circumstance. And then again, because the government was corrupt, they were pairing the fairest of the children, right, with families in Europe and families in America.
That just, I mean, when I look at her, when I look at you, and I imagine how amazingly gorgeous you were as a baby if you're a grown woman and you look the way you do. I mean, don't you think she would have been the cutest baby in the world? I wonder if there's, I just can't help but wonder, was there anything more sinister? I mean, if you're going to steal the prettiest of babies because you know she fetches a very high price or something like that, to know your worth in terms of dollars and cents as a baby, or what the price people put on your head, is demeaning in itself to me, because you can't put a price on a human life. But here you are with that kind of information. Did that feel so strange to you when you saw that? I can't imagine what that would do in my spirit to see that. What did that feel like for you?
I always knew, but I saw the paperwork about, I want to say like maybe 6 years ago. And when I looked down at the paper, I just kind of felt like numb in the beginning. And it took me a while to kind of just let it sink in and digest and process. And I cried a lot. And I think anybody who's been through something that, like what I've been through, it's kind of like what Paul said in the Bible, where he had a thorn in the flesh, right? That he would never be able to get rid of. But it was something that would always humble him and keep him dependent on God. And so when I got saved, the Lord took the sting out of the torment of my circumstance and my situation. But it is something that I have to continually lay down before the Lord. It is something that I have to continually fight the temptation to say, why? Or shake my fist in God's face and say, why have you done this to me? Because there are a lot of layers to this. And, you know, I am at the age that I'm at now, and it's like, and as each decade goes by, I unfold another chapter of this story in my life. It's not like I've dealt with it, it goes away, and then I can just, you know, be done with it. There's never be done with it. There is and there isn't, right? But I just think in every phase, just like when I saw the number on the paper, you know, you find somebody that you love. Like my husband has just been my rock of 23 years. Like, sit with him, process it. I've gone to therapy. You know, like done all the things. I've sought godly counsel. I've prayed. I've fasted. And when I've gotten information that's been too hard for me to deal with in my flesh, I've just had to surrender all over.
Yeah.
Surrender it.
I imagine so. Yeah. So I want to know, Lee, what is your first memory? The first thing that you remember as a child, where was it and who is it? Who was involved in that memory?
The very first memory I can recall at the moment probably would be when I was in preschool, and I remember my mom had to leave. And I remember, I mean, just like with most kids, I feel like, you know, if you're a mother, you know that that moment of separation is like grueling. If you're really close with your child, well, even, I don't know, I guess even if you're not, right? Like it's just a hard moment to go through. And so I just remember that being excruciating for my soul. And I remember I cried incessantly. And I remember the teachers didn't even know how to calm me down. And I was only maybe 2 or 3 years old, and I remember them just taking me over to this little sink, and I was like, they turned on the water, and I was washing these dishes, and it distracted me, and I just remember the sound of the water calm me. But I look back at that memory now, and I think that the reason why that's the first memory that I remember is because it represented that separation, and it was having, you know, dealing with that separation anxiety. So that's kind of the earliest, one of the earliest memories.
Wow. And tell us a little bit about your life here in the United States and what your family was like and that experience.
Yeah.
I want to know. I'm very curious because first of all, I'm going to go do the research. I want to find out about the Colombian kids. I want to find out about all of them that were stolen or bought or given up for adoption, because to not know your story like you, to not know whether your mom was 13 or 30 and whether she it was, she did this by force or did this by choice. All of those things, I'm sure, are questions that you've thought about, and I hope you get all those answers. But tell us what happened after you got here, or because I also want to find out, when did you realize that these are not your biological parents? Your story is so
There's so many pieces.
exciting.
There's so
Anyway,
many
okay,
things. Yeah.
Tell me about your life here.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, like I said, there was not a background check done on my adopted family. So, and if you were with us,
which is illegal to start with,
right, or illegal to start with. And if you watched on the virtual summit, I did share that my mother had undiagnosed mental illness, and we also think that my father had like an undiagnosed special need. What that is defined as, I don't really know. I'm not a medical professional, but there was something going on with my dad. But we would come to find out later on in life that my mother had schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, psychosis. And so there was just like a myriad of mental health challenges that again were undiagnosed and she was not on medication for. During the virtual summit, I had referenced that book, A Child Called It. And I don't know if any of you in the audience are familiar with that story. And I know you know that story. I think it was the first book I had ever read that really brought healing in a very strange way, right? Healing because it's the story of a boy who was just horrifically physically abused by his mother. But it was healing for me because I was like, there are people like me out in the world. And so when I knew that I wasn't the only one, that kind of brought sort of a solace to me. But in any case, so I was severely physically abused in ways very similar to the boy in the book. And it really is only by the grace of God that I am alive and breathing today. There were several instances where my life should have been taken, and only Jesus, which is funny that I say even the name of Jesus because I was raised Jewish. So my family was Jewish. So we were not Hasidic Jews. Sometimes people get this confused. They're just like with Catholicism and Christianity, right? There are different denominations and things like that. So the same way it is with Judaism. So we were just a conservative religious family, which meant we celebrated the high holy days. We kept the Sabbath. We ate kosher. I went to a public school, but I had to observe these things even like in public school. I went to Hebrew school twice a week from when I was a very, very little girl until I was 13 years old. And I learned to read and write and sing and everything in Hebrew. We had teachers from Yeshiva University, which is a big thing here in New York. And I loved my rabbi. I always had a very special relationship with my rabbi, and I really loved God. I really, truly did. I believed in Abba. I believed in him. I didn't understand I don't want to say the hypocrisy, but I didn't understand the dynamics of what was happening to me if there was this loving God. And so that question was always looming in the back of my mind as a kid. But, in other respects, I grew up in a very well-to-do, affluent neighborhood. My extended adopted family were very, very good to me. And I want to just make sure that I mention that because what was happening to me within my home was very secretive. It was very dark. It was very quiet. Where I was living, this sort of thing just didn't take place. And so the school system that I was in, there were teachers that noticed bruises on me. There were teachers that noticed something wasn't right. I went to camp in the summer. Everyone could tell, and when I was a child, I remember teachers and maybe staff at the camp trying to engage me in conversations that I knew were leading to is everything okay at home? But I was too afraid to say anything. And so I did have some neighbors that would call the police because they would hear the screams and they would hear what was happening. But unfortunately, they didn't probe enough. And, ACS, here in New York, it's Administration for Children's Services. They didn't get involved, unfortunately, until I was a teenager, until I was really verbal and I had rebelled and began to talk about what was actually happening to me.
Wow. So you, and if you want to go get that book and find out and some of the things, because I know you have questions and I know you want to know what that looked like. And, but do you think that First of all, did you have siblings?
I did, yeah. So I have a brother. I have one brother. He's also adopted from Colombia.
Okay.
The difference with our adoption is that they went down to Colombia to go get him, and they have more of a knowledge. It seems like his was more legal. He came from a family that had a lot of children in it, and so his family admittedly could not take care of him.
Okay.
And so they were the ones who put him in the orphanage, and my parents went to go get him. And so within that year, that was when I came. And so he's a year and a half older than me, but we're still like this.
Yeah.
That's my brother.
So was his story similar to yours? Did he have that kind of abusive relationship with your mom and that sort of thing as well?
Yeah, I mean, he, and I'll say this just to sort of cover him, he's not as open as I am with the story, but what I can say is that, he suffered in that home, and like I said, he's got his own story and side of things, and he went through some really detrimental stuff that everybody knew, everybody knew what was happening in the home. But I will tell you, and I know he wouldn't mind me sharing this, that unfortunately I think it was more confusing for him because my adopted mother wanted him, if that makes sense. She wanted a son. I was more of a suggestion by the rest of the family.
I see.
I think that my grandfather saw that there were deficiencies that his daughter had, and they were very old school. And instead of, getting her the help that she needed with her mental health, I think they just wanted to make her life look as normal as possible. So it's like if he could give her, right, financially, if he could give her the quintessential family unit, right, the boy, the girl, right, the husband, they were a paired match, my mother and father. Oh. My grandparents both were friends, and they kind of set them up because they were just a little bit odd and off, and so they got put together. And then my grandfather, like I said, just kind of put these pieces together for her so that she could live somewhat of a normal life, because the rest of the family was very successful and very, very well to do. We have a lot of scientists and engineers and that sort of thing in the family, and here she was the only one that was not accomplished. Right. And so if she could be accomplished at this, then they thought that they were servicing her as a parent the right way,
Yes.
But yes, so my brother, yeah, that's my heart.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so good. I'm glad that it was not as painful as it was, that you weren't alone.
Yeah.
Right. That,
right,
to me, it would create a bond that you can't lose.
Right. Even
now as adults. So tell us about your rebellious years, how you ended up in the foster care system, and tell us about your journey to Jesus.
Okay. So when I was 12 years old, so I was abused, and when I was about 12, I went into junior high school, and I started to get bullied at school. There was always this thing that everybody used to call me the pretty girl.
They're jealous. I'm jealous, and I'm not going to bully you. I'm just going to tell you.
No. But what happened in that was that I know that there was an agenda. The enemy, I didn't know this at the time, but the enemy had an agenda. When I grew up in Temple, they don't tell you about the devil. They don't tell you about Satan. There's none of that. I always had a very deep curiosity about Jesus, because he was rejected, because we weren't allowed to talk about him. So because we weren't allowed to talk about him, I kind of purposed in my heart, one day I'll get to know like this Jesus. But anyway, when I was 12 years old, went into junior high school, got bullied, and said to myself, never, ever, ever again. No one's ever going to put their hands on me again. No one's ever going to. And so my mother came to hit me one day, and it was just kind of like where the revolution began, and the rebellion began. I stood up for myself, and I made sure that she would never put her hands on me again. But with that came rebellion against everybody else. So now here I had been bullied by my mother, by these other people in my world. And then I decided that I was going to be the bully. And I decided that I was going to get as hard as I could, and I was going to surround myself with the hardest people that I could find. Literally, I was like on a hunt to find the hardest people. And I did. And I did some really terrible things. I was very violent. I ended up like in the respective neighborhood that I was in. I just found the wrong crowd to connect to. And
so you beat up people?
And by the grace of God, I didn't end up in the juvenile
no, really. Did you beat
jail.
people up?
I'm not proud to admit that and to say yes
I'm
to
not
that.
making a joke,
but I did.
I just never ever hit
Yeah.
anybody in my life.
Yeah.
So I'm so honored to have a friend that actually literally beat people up. Just want to say that.
Well, it was definitely, not my finer days.
No.
But, but what's
So you
interesting.
get into fights a lot.
So I did, and we would just go out to look for fights, and I
Wow.
would carry weapons, and
Like
I
a
would
gang?
do like a literal gang, and
So the pretty girl is in the gang.
right. But then that was like a
bad
mockery.
thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Then that was just, and it was just for any reason I could find. I would just start with people, and then there was a situation that happened that, again, only by the grace of God, ended up in the court. I ended up before a judge because I had done something.
Rewind. Okay, so I still want to go back to you
Yeah.
being a thug.
Yeah. Well, that went on for years.
Right, it was a long part of your life.
Yes.
And I want to know what's going on in your mind, because to most people you could just gloss over that.
Yeah.
But I deal with that in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right? There's so many girls that come here.
Yep.
There's some girls that have been delivered from that kind of lifestyle. There are girls that my husband had to pull staples out of their head. In our church, because I came into this kind of neighborhood and environment where that's not an abnormal thing, but to me it was so new.
Right.
I want to know what goes on in your mind when you look for that kind of validation, because I know that's what it is about. It
Yeah.
makes you feel powerful or important, or what is it that could cause you to not see someone as human or
Yeah.
without compassion?
Yeah,
Does that
yeah,
make
yeah.
sense?
Oh, absolutely.
I want to know what they think, because I've
Absolutely.
always wondered, and nobody can
Yeah.
really help me there.
I think a few things. So one, it's a false sense of respect, right?
Okay.
So I never felt respected. So in my mind, I was like, I'm going to be respected. And that was my definition. This is how I get respect, by fearing, by
that
people
makes sense.
fearing me, right? So that's one. Two, it's self-defense. I've been living in this mode my whole life, but I've been living like this my whole life. So now I'm going to switch that for me. I'm going to empower myself, false sense of empowerment, false sense.
Right.
But now I'm going to empower myself and stand it up in the face and put my fists up and then handle it and confront it like that, which is not it. And then three, I think it's relief. Because I just remember every time I would do that, again, things that I'm not proud of, that I spent the first 1.5 to 2 years literally weeping in the presence of God because of the things that I had done to people that were just, I can't even like say the things that I've done. But I could tell you that I didn't end up in jail only because I lied, only because I had an attorney concoct a story and just said, go with this, and somebody else ended up getting blamed for the crime. But in any case, there is this sense of like, now I am no longer the victim, I am the victor, right? And that's the deception of the enemy. He makes us believe that if we're the ones to be the aggressor, right, that we're powerful, that we have this power. And again, it's a false sense of identity.
But it's everywhere.
Right.
It's 100% in the public schools. I have young ladies that won't even go to school, that stay home and cry.
Right.
Because there is a young woman who might just be needing something, is so broken that it's the only way she feels powerful and validated and secure and relief is to put this kind of hurt on someone else and or even to defend herself, because I've had girls say it's either beat them up or get beaten up.
Right.
And so in these neighborhoods that we live in particular, you had to put defenses up, and lots of parents think that that is a healthy thing for your girl to be able to fight back and defend herself. Where does a New Yorker find, where does a 15-year-old New York girl with nobody to stand up for her find a medium? Where does she find a place that she can say, look, this is the school I go to, I am going to get jumped? How does she deal with that?
Yeah, I think probably the best answer I could give, because I remember being that girl and I remember thinking I have no one to go to. But if I could go back in time, I probably would find a mentor, or I would probably find a teacher that I trusted, or I'd probably confide in an adult. And the reason why I say that is because I think a lot of what happens is we confide as teenagers,
In each other.
Right. And And I think what happened with me, again, because my story is very unique in nature, I would try to tell the girls like in my neighborhood what was happening. Well, really one girl in particular, when I was about 13 years old, and she was just so sort of like shocked by what I had shared with her, that she was like, you're lying, that there's no way that happened to you. And I was like, just really good at hiding. I was just really good at like showing face. Like I could just make you believe anything, you know? I was also like really into like musical theater and like, you know, and the arts and like, you know, so I could really make you think that everything really was okay, right? But so I think I would just tell that young girl, you know, who really wants stuff to stop, to go to an adult. And I did end up going to an adult, but I ended up going to an adult, now I don't want to say when it was too late, but there was so much damage done by that point. I was seeking therapy, and there are guidance counselors at school, which are great outlets, you know, and if young people would just do their due diligence and access those helps that are available and those supports, that could be the pivotal moment where things change for them. And that was where it was for me. It went from talking to a guidance counselor to talking to a therapist, and that was how the interventions began. Okay. Now, the interventions didn't feel good and I didn't feel safe, but finally at least somebody knew, and I felt a sense of relief that I knew was right and positive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. We've had, we have several guidance counselors that not only attend this church, but watch this podcast. Mm-hmm. And a few of them have said to me, these girls will come talk to them, or these guys will, but they're not sure what they want. Yeah. And I have other situations, and these have actually come up this year. So many of those where one young lady, I got a call from a principal or from a guidance counselor, because now her thoughts are suicidal. But why are you calling me at this point? Mm-hmm. Okay, this child has been talking to them for a very long time, which I get the confidentiality thing. But the minute they mention not even suicidal tendencies, just thoughts, it's your turn, and they back out of it. But so I feel like if maybe in New York it's not going far enough, it's not making them feel protected or making them feel, you know, defended. Right. So you said you ended up in court. So you were going to go to prison, and by the grace of God and a couple lies, you didn't. Right.
And then I thought I was going to burn in hell because I had to put my hand on a Bible, and I didn't know Jesus yet, but I was still a Jew, and I was like, uh-oh. I'm like, this can't be right, but oh, well, I guess I'll take my chances, and I want to end up in a jail. Oh my goodness. Yeah, and thankfully I didn't. Thankfully I didn't, because shortly what happened after that was that I did finally say something to somebody, but it was, like I said, not that it was too far gone, but by that point, I started running away. I started cutting myself. You know, I started using drugs and alcohol. I started to become promiscuous, and I was so young. I was just so young, and you know, I gave my body away, and not just, you know, sexually, not even just that, but with drugs, with alcohol, with fighting. Right? We talk about women giving their bodies away in that respect, but it's so much deeper than that. You know what I mean? It's giving your body away and your mind and your soul away to the pain, right? And to the torment that you're going through. And I literally served my torment. Like, that's what I was doing. Essentially, that's what I was doing. I was serving, because there's a price to pay, right? I didn't know the enemy was the one behind the scenes. I didn't know that was the one I was serving, if that makes sense. Yeah. But I ate all the deception up. I just ate it up. And so it wasn't until I started experiencing those things and then started expressing acts of violence against my parents, acts of violence that really scared me. To a point that's when I went to my therapist and said, either I'm going to die or they're going to die. And I just had become not only suicidal, but homicidal. And that's a really dark side that I think a lot of probably women of God don't talk about. But when you're going through that level of trauma, there is homicidal ideation, right? We talk a lot about suicidal ideation, but there is homicidal ideation. And I remember that there was a time when I was about 14 that I stood over my parents with a knife in my hand. And I just remember the thought of wanting to be a singer when I grew older, like right. Whitney Houston. I wanted to be like Whitney Houston. That and knowing that I could be sitting in a jail cell for the rest of my life is what made me walk out of the room. Wow. But I just remember contemplating that, and that's how deep and dark it had become. Because I didn't care anymore. Like, I was like, I have nothing else to live for. It just doesn't matter. Yeah. By the time I was 14, I was working in a club. I was working in a club as a cocktail waitress. I was 14 years old. I was just passing off. I was working at the Limelight and Palladium, which back in the 90s, these were like really big clubs in New York City. And I was just rolling with people that I just had no business like being around, people that were in their 20s. And here I was 14, lying and saying that I was 18 so that I could get in all these places and putting myself in real compromising situations. And so the fact that, I mean, there's so much more, but the fact that I'm here, even up until I was just 15, it was just a miracle in and of itself, because it's dangerous out there.
Well, if you're a movie producer and you want to write and produce this movie, call me and we'll. Can you believe this? Like, we're all living vicariously through her right now, because it's 5 movies rolled into one, and all of this, and she's just 15 at that point. And so, Jewish girl, of Colombian-born Jewish girl.
Yep.
So you speak and read Hebrew.
Yes.
And you know all the high holy days. And you went to Jewish school.
Yes.
And you kept up appearances for everybody else. And rebelled. Wow. Ended up before a judge. And you ran away.
Yeah.
How did you get out of your parents' house for good?
So it was when I went to that therapist. So I went to the therapist and said, this is what's happening, and if nobody intervenes, it's just going to end really bad.
Right.
That one conversation opened up a whole investigation. In that investigation, ACS got involved. They would show up unannounced. They would show up announced. They would have conversations with my mom. They could tell. Everybody could tell that my mother was mentally ill. It was just the way she would present herself physically was very telling of her mental state. The way she would speak to people, there was, as sort of angry and terrible as she was also strangely childlike. Like, she was very naive in a sense. And so anyway, they concluded, and the case was founded against my mother, that I was in fact being abused and that I should be taken out of the home. Now my brother, because a lot of people ask me this, well, why were you taken out and your brother wasn't? My brother at that point was very protective over my mother, and that's a whole different sort of thing to get into. But in any case, I did end up leaving, and the whole idea was for my family to be rehabilitated through the foster care system, because foster care, and just to be clear, foster care is not like the state's going to snatch you out of your home and then going to throw you in and then you'll never see your family again. That's not the intention. The intention is to rehabilitate the family.
Right.
The intention is to try to, bring the family back together through therapies and other, modes of healing. However, my mother had a very deep hatred for me, like extremely deep hatred. And as far as my father was concerned, because a lot of people ask me, well, what about your dad? My mother was 5'3", she's a little hefty, and had some power to her. My dad was 6'4", and like just this big guy. But because we understood that he probably had some special need that was undiagnosed, he really was unable to stick up for me, to stick up for himself. She was also very abusive to my dad. And he was always very kind to me. So I just want to kind of note that, because that really did go far as in terms of like who I chose for a husband.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I feel like that was a grace that God gave to me, that even though I struggled, I struggled as far as like, not having a dad that was protective, and I had, those daddy issues and had to really lay that and surrender that at the feet of Jesus. But then at the same instance, I always looked for a man that was kind, and that would, be communicative. And so my father was that. However, my mother was overbearing. And so when I went into the foster care system, she totally refused to go to any appointments, any therapy sessions, anything. Within a year that I was in foster care, she ended up severing. They both went to the court and they severed all parental right of me. And I became a ward of New York State, which essentially means that the state is now my parent. And so that led into just more rage, more anger, more violence, more drugs, more all of it. And that's really when I started making the decisions that were, if my life hadn't already been threatened, at this point, it just got taken up a notch. But I also want to just make mention that I was also in a performing arts school for music. And so at the time, music was really a saving grace, because it helped me to be connected to a community where I felt special. Even though my life was chaotic, I felt like this was a safe place.
So during all of this, you were still going to school and still in the
Yes.
performing arts.
Yes.
So you were in theater.
I studied classical opera
Oh, wow.
in school, but like I did stuff with the musical theater department just because I wanted to be the mayor of the school and be involved in everything. So
I get that for your personality.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little bit. You actually continued in singing and a career that way.
Yes.
How'd you go from a crazy teenager, that you were working in a nightclub to being in a band, I think you were?
I was in
Tell
a
us
singing
about
group.
that.
Yeah. So I just had some cool opportunities. I was in the middle of New York City, like in Manhattan. That's where my school was. And we were near the Fox 5 building, the news station. And so there were always these opportunities to be on TV. I started doing modeling. I got scouted on the street. And so like whatever, I was just, again, my hands in everything while simultaneously going from foster home to foster home, a runaway. I was AWOL. I was just running the street. I was like, there was a lot happening at all times in my life. Nothing ever really subsided. Maybe not. And maybe it never did. It just went into something positive. So my life has always just sort of been very busy. So I went to this school, opportunities opened for me. And then one night I was in night school. I was trying to catch up on credits because, I was cutting school, running away, doing drugs and trying to be cool, that I get left back. And then I go to night school and the teacher kind of reads my name out and then he reads my school name out. And it was, a collection. The students were a collection of students from various high schools. And he says, oh, I went to a school called Talent Unlimited. And so he says, oh, Talent Unlimited. And I said, yeah, and this girl came over to me afterwards and she's like, you sang? And I'm like, yeah. And we were down in the subway and she's like, sing for me. And I'm like, okay. In the subway. But this is just what we did. I went to a performing arts school. Like if you ever watched High School Musical, like this is what we did. We just sang in the hallways. I've always been very like confident. And so I just started singing and she was just like, I have this group. You got to be part of this group. And I just thought it was some like cheesy thing. I just was like, all right, it'll probably look good on paper so I could tell like my foster agency that I'm connected to something positive. But what I didn't know was that we had a manager. I came into this group that had a manager and our manager was actually the assistant to the president of Bad Boy, the label with Diddy and whatever. And so it just was bigger than me and it was bigger than what I thought. And again, simultaneously, I'm walking through this trauma, which was just very interesting and putting myself in situations. And so there are a lot of things that happened in between, but while I was in the music industry, and we were on tour and we were getting ready to sign, and we had all this stuff on the table. I'll tell you, this is really just only the Holy Spirit could script something like this. So, we're on tour, we're in Atlanta, and we're sitting like in a circle and we're just like smoking weed and we're, puffing on a blunt and we're just like, here, pass. And then someone's telling me about Jesus and they're like, yeah, we had some dancers. So it was our dancers and the two other girls in the group and we're like, puff, pass. Yeah, let me tell you about Jesus. And it was like going around and I'm like, yeah, what did he do? He died for my sins. Oh yeah. And I, I don't understand at this moment how like, what's happening. I don't understand how irreverent I'm being. I had no idea about the saving grace of Jesus Christ, even in that moment. And just before that happened, I had a near-death experience, which is a lot to get into, but I had a near-death experience. And so while they're talking to me about Jesus, but while I was for the ride, we had a tour van, and on the tour van bus, I was reading a book about angels. I had almost got shot and killed, and a young man died right next to me. And it awakened me because at that point I professed atheism. I was like, there is no God. And so this is the reason why I was so open to hearing about Jesus. And they tell me, oh, come to church, like on Sunday. So we returned from tour. I went to church. I wake up in the morning. I'm getting ready to go. And I turn on the TV and I hear that Biggie Smalls dies. Now, we had paperwork.
Wait, this is a momentous occasion, and Fanny's like, can we have a moment of silence because Biggie died? Anyway, sorry. So what happened?
Well, the scripting of that only Christ could do, right? He met me in the middle of my passion. He met me in the middle of all that success. He met us in the middle of where something could have potentially happened for us as a group, and then everything that day got shut down. And so I get to church that morning, and there's a woman preaching in the church that I walked into, the denomination didn't favor women to be at the pulpit, right? And so I just think that, again, was just another grace and moment that, the Holy Spirit created for me to walk into. But they give the altar call. I see everybody like lifting their hands. I didn't know what that was about. I had been to a Christian church one time, and the reason why I had went was because somebody had beef at the church and they needed to fight this girl. And I was like, all right, let's roll. I'm like, let's go. That's what we do at church? Okay, well, what do I know? I don't know. So let's go fight. So now here I am, and all these people are lifted hands. And I'm like, what are they doing? And I'm thinking it's like the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life. And my friend's like, go down, go, get prayed for. And I'm like, no, leave me alone.
Everybody needs that friend, man.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
And, I kept saying no. And then I can only describe it as I feel like an angel just pushed me up off my behind. And the next thing I knew, I was walking down to the front. And the next thing I know, I just felt, I can't explain it. It was a physical, just overwhelming feeling. And I just began to weep. And I just lifted, every time I tell this story, I just get like, I lifted my hands, and I just remember I was so cold, and I was so angry, and I was so full of rage, and I was so tormented. And I just remember it was like liquid love, like just came into my body. It was like a literal physical sensation. And there's no exaggeration there, no dramatics, no theatrics, nothing, but a literal physical warmth in my soul. I had never been told by a parent that I was loved. I had never been like, affection. Nobody had ever shown me that. It's just been years of piled on like, rage. And just in that moment, it's just something broke. And I just remember I just was never, ever the same again. And that was it. I mean, he captured my heart. I fell madly and deeply in love with Jesus. And right afterwards, I remember I was working for Motown at the time. So I was simultaneously like in the industry singing, and then I was working for the industry. And the Lord just spoke to me, and he was just like, I need you to come out. He's like, I need you to come out. He's like, I need you to come live for me, sing for me. Let me teach you about who I am. And I was like, you got it all. You got it all. All of it.
Wow.
All of it.
I don't even know what to say. Do you guys know what to say? Lee, okay, so first of all, somebody just needs to make the movie already. She can act her own self in the current age. Right? You can act your own self. That is the craziest. And you're right. No, you can't make stuff like that up, because when you're writing a script or a book, they tell you that the protagonist has to have one event or one major catastrophe or crisis. And your life is just a roller coaster of things that God has saved many people from. And it was the main reason why I felt like I needed you here, because there's so many people who will hang on to one of those things and look at it and say God deserted them in that. You don't know, up to yesterday, people said, oh, you don't know what I've been through, or you don't know. And somebody stopped me. I was standing on the street yesterday, and somebody stopped me right then to say to me, you don't know how broken I am because of this. And here you are sitting, going through that and 15 more things, but saying in one instant, liquid love from the Lord just takes all of that away. And so today I'm going to let Lee talk to you for a little bit more, but this is what I want us to take away from this. Whatever it is that the enemy has tried to lie to you about and say that you're in such an unfixable and unchangeable situation in your life, or that God has not put his fingerprint on you, because how could X, Y, or Z had happened if you were chosen by God? I need you to just turn around and look at yourself right now and see that if it was not God who was protecting you, who maybe gave you a story, an incredible story. What if none of these things have happened? She wouldn't be sitting here blowing my mind right now and changing your life. But here she is. So Lee, I know there's so much that you left out that you couldn't. Are you writing your book, by the way?
I wrote a book 10 years ago. That's
Where
a
is
whole
it?
long story. It was being shopped
Okay,
on
hold
the
on.
West
She
Coast.
wrote a book. She sang she worked for Motown. She was on Diddy's label, Diddy's assistant's label.
Yeah.
She was a model. She was a a cocktail waitress in a nightclub. She was a gangster. She was adopted. She was human trafficked. I'm like, okay, I've now found my new Sharo in life. Here she is. What has your Sharo done? And she's a preacher. She's a PG. And I mean, if she can tell us about your book.
Okay, so I did write an autobiography. I was approached, it was well over a decade ago. I was part of the Dream Center at the time. And so I had gotten approached. Unfortunately, my children were young at the time, and it was being shopped by Coastal, and it was over on the West Coast, the publishing company. Right. And so it never did get picked up because I couldn't sit in the offices with the executives, like to really speak the story and be the face of my own book. But yes, the book is written. But I do believe that the Lord didn't allow that because there was so much more that happened healing-wise that part needs to get included.
The story wasn't finished.
Yeah, there's so much healing that's happened. There's so much closure. And that's a whole that in and of itself could be a book.
Okay.
So we'll see what God does with
that.
Well,
we will wait, and we are excited about it. So do you still sing? What are you doing now? Tell them.
Okay, so singing, yes, my whole life. I've always sang. I've been on worship teams. I've been a worship leader. I've recorded. I write. Currently, I'm on pause with the music, but just looking to get back into it somehow. I don't know how that's going to work. However, I do believe that the Lord will have seasons of development and different giftings and areas of our lives, and will also ask us to lay things down like Abraham did Isaac to see if that's an idol or is that something, we really have surrendered to the Lord. So the Lord has developed other giftings in my life, and I've done pastoral work in the Bronx for 12 years. Oh my goodness, I've been a public speaker in a variation of different settings, secular, churches, the United Nations, we talked about that. And so I've had the opportunity for the past 25 years to just walk into spaces and places and platforms. I've done TV shows, and I've done all kinds of crazy stuff to glorify the name of the Lord and to share my story. And then 10 years ago, well, about maybe 12 years ago, the Lord called me to prophetic painting. And so I started my own business, and I am a prophetic painter. And so I've done some live art things. And
okay, leave my studio. I don't want you in here anymore. I'm
so
just kidding. Do you here?
Yeah. Oh, and I have 5 kids. I have 5.
And she has 5 kids. Oh my gosh, she's like me, but on steroids and like 50 times amazinger. That's not even a word. But oh my gosh, so you have art.
Yes.
And where can we find your stuff? Where can we buy your music?
Yeah.
And that's not even why you're here. I didn't even know any of this till this very moment. But where's your art?
She did not know any of this.
Where's your stuff?
Yeah. Okay, so you can go on to Sweetly Inspired. So that's the word sweet, and then my name, Lee, inspired, ED. At gmail.com. That's my email for that. You can Google that. You can get on my Instagram under Sweetly Inspired. So I do have some like worshipy things on there. There's nothing recorded. There's some things on YouTube if you Google my name. But with the singing, that kind of got put over to the side, and that's a whole other story. But yeah, you can just YouTube and just kind of put my name. So that's Sweetly Inspired. Okay. So if they get on Instagram, you guys can find it there, and that's a lot of my work is featured.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited, and I'm so honored. I mean, when Lee and I met and became friends, I didn't know I was speaking to somebody so important. I just thought she was the cutest girl I'd ever seen, and then she was a preacher, and it was like, oh, we have to be friends. We must be friends because this is going to be awesome. And then I find out, wait, she was involved in human trafficking of some kind. Oh my gosh, she's not just a friend, she's a sister. And then when I find out, wait a minute, she has the most incredible story in the world, I'm just so grateful to be a part of your life and your story. I'm serious. Like, he's stuck me in there. To be in your story is a big deal for me. Will you just talk to my girls and tell them whatever the Lord says to tell them as we finish?
For sure. So, before I got here today, I was praying a lot about this. And so here's what I want to share with you. Suffering is universal. It will happen to every single one of us. It rains on the just and it rains on the unjust, right? And so suffering is like a seed. And if we see suffering as a seed, and if we take our suffering and we can lay that down and we can find forgiveness and we can forgive those who have hurt us, and we can get to a place where we are even just open and willing to the possibility of what that will look like, that is your seed of suffering being put in the ground. And just like Jesus said, unless a seed gets put in the ground and dies, it cannot burst forth into a tree, right? It can't grow into something filled with life. And so I don't know where you have suffered. I don't know if maybe there's somebody who's watching that has lost a baby, and maybe you've had to bury your child, or maybe you've gone through a divorce, or maybe you have gone through rejection, or maybe you've experienced orphandom in a way, maybe not like me, but maybe you had a father that left at a young age. I don't know what your circumstances, but what I do know is if you will take that suffering and see it as a seed, it will go into the ground. And if you choose to be willing to forgive and to let it go and to say, Lord, I believe that you have a bigger purpose and destiny and plan for this, I promise you that that seed of suffering will become a tree of life, and the fruit produced off of it will not only feed the people in your own respective world, but it will change a generation, and it will feed your legacy, and it will be a sustenance. It'll break generational curses, and it'll be sustenance, and it'll be meat for those even in the body of Christ to eat off of. I mean, we're not just meant to go into the church and to shine a light, but to go into the world. I think one of the greatest opportunities that I've had is to go to the most broken of people. And that is where I have seen the glory of God shine the most. And people say to me all the time, oh, I wish I could have what you have. And not to say that I wouldn't want you to experience what I've experienced, the glory, the goodness, the healing, the miraculous, the provision, because I have seen it. I have not seen it all, but I have seen a measure pressed down, shaken together, and running over. And I can tell you that God will leave a witness. He has left me. He allowed me to still be alive with breath in my lungs so that I could stand as a living witness that there is hope and life after suffering. There is hope and there is life after death, after rape, after sexual promiscuity. There is hope. There is life. There is a purification. There's a renewal that Christ comes and provides. He washes us. He cleanses us from all unrighteousness. He makes us brand new so that people can then eat off of the fruit of our life. And if you would be willing today, if you would be willing to just lean in, to let your soul lean in, because a lot of you, your spirit is willing, and you're saying to yourself, I want to get to that space, but I just don't know how to. Well, the Bible says that if we be first willing and then obedient, we will eat the good of the land. If you allow your soul to lean in right now and say, okay, Lord, and wherever you are, just lift your hands. If you got to get on your knees, if you're weeping right now, I have a feeling some of you are watching right now and you're weeping and you're just like, Lord, please, I need freedom. Lord, please, I want to see what she's been able to see. Well, let me tell you, God is no respecter of persons. He is, and he will meet you right where you are right now. Just open up your heart. Just tell him, I can't do this on my own. I don't want to do this on my own. I release myself of the pride. I don't, because some of us are so angry. Some of us hold on and we've been shaking our fist at God. Maybe not with our mouth, but maybe inwardly. We've been resistant to healing because we want to know the answer why. Well, I'm releasing you by the power of the Holy Ghost. I'm releasing you right now from the torment of that spirit of why that has come upon you, that has not allowed you to surrender your pain at the foot of the cross. And I'm telling you, there is freedom. The spirit of freedom is here for you to experience the new life that Christ has died for you to have. So just remember, if you need to know who else has been through this, watch this back or go into the scriptures. I wasn't left, and that's the thing. When I got saved, I wasn't left without an example. It's not like I looked and was like, who else did this go to? Who else went through something like this? I went right to the scriptures. The first book I read was the book of Job. The very first book of the Bible, as a born-again Christian believer, the first book I read was Job. And I realized I'm not the only one. And I read Esther, and I read how she was an orphan girl and how God raised her up as a queen. And I read the story of Joseph, who was abandoned and sold. And I read the story of Moses, who was sent at 3 months of age into the reeds, right, and sent down that river. And I read these stories and I connected with them. I allowed my mind and my soul to connect with them and say, you know what, God, if you could do it for them, you can do it for me. He will raise you up. He will raise you up and he will set you. He'll take you, I think it's 1 Samuel says, he'll take you up out of the dunghill, the ash heap, and he will set you upon a high place among the princes of his people. He has a great plan and destiny for your life. So hang on to that.
What an amazing and powerful word. And I hope that it got in your spirit. I hope that you didn't just just hear words, but if you have to go back and listen to that last piece again, listen to it 10 times and let it get in your spirit. This is something that I absolutely subscribe to. I remember the story of Rizpah and her losing her sons in the script is one of my favorite stories, because it's the same thing, because the loss became the seed. The loss became the seed for her legacy and her future. And this is what Lee has said so eloquently to you. And I just want to bless all of you today. And if you have in any way been affected, or if God has reached your soul, or if your heart needs help, or whatever it is, I want you to leave a comment or send us a direct message, or contact us at Preacher Girl, and we will get this message to Pastor Lee, and we will have her back. And Hope NYC Women, I know you love her. Trust me, you'll see a lot of her in the next few months. As long as she's got time, we'll find time. But Lee, I want to say thank you so much. You have made this worth waiting for. It's been a while since we've had a very meaningful podcast, and this one I'm so excited for them to get to know you. I'm honored to know you. I'm honored that my girls got to see you today and hear your story, and I bless the day you walked into this church. It was a big deal for me, so thank you for being here.
Thank you, my friend. I love you.
I love you too. So she's a monarch, just like
yes.
me. Yep.
Hey.
We're part of the Monarch Society,
We sure are.
and if you need to know what that is about, ladies, you got to be part of it, because remember, if God called you, no one can uncall you, because you don't need a pulpit, you just need a message. Love you guys. Bye-bye. Man, you were amazing. You're like, I thought you were amazing, and now I know you're not just amazing. You're like, I can't even talk to you with my eyes open anymore.
So funny.
She's so cool. She's like the fanciest person I've ever met in my life.
The fanciest? Yeah. After I told you all that.